There is a line in a 1931 maintenance report that reads, "Elevator panel indicates key operated stop between sub-basement 1 and sub-basement 2. No corresponding level appears on permit drawings, no explanation offered." That is how it begins, not with a discovery, not with alarm, but with a discrepancy noted in the flat professional language of a man whose entire job was finding what didn't match and recording it exactly. His name was Walter Marsh. He recorded it. Then he went looking. The report he filed is in no city archive index. The carbon copy he kept is the only one. Walter Marsh was employed by the Continental Building Management Association from 1924 to 1931, first as a mechanical systems inspector and later as senior maintenance engineer for a portfolio of 7 downtown Chicago properties. His work was ordinary in the way that most necessary work is ordinary: boiler inspections, elevator cable assessments, pipe chase surveys, quarterly reports filed with building owners who rarely read them. He was 43 years old in 1931. He had trained under a Union Pacific infrastructure crew in the early 1900s. He knew what to expect below the public floors, and for 7 years what he expected is exactly what he found. I came to this report through a different search. I was tracing permit records of Chicago commercial buildings from the 1910s, trying to understand a discrepancy in mechanical specifications that didn't correspond to the construction timelines on file. It was the kind of research that produces dead ends more often than conclusions. I found Marsh's carbon copy in a folder that had no business being where it was. I almost set it aside. What follows is what the report contains, and what the infrastructure record corroborates. What a building engineer expected to find below street level in 1931 was specific and consistent. The sub-basement of any downtown commercial structure built after 1895 would contain a boiler room, usually occupying the largest footprint, with coal storage adjacent or connected by a short gravity chute from the service alley above. Mechanical equipment, pumps, pressure relief valves, electrical switchgear occupied the remaining wall bays. The freight elevator terminated at a loading dock that opened to that alley. In older buildings, a coal vault or converted cold storage room accounted for the rest. The proportions were standardized. An experienced engineer could walk a sub-basement he had never visited and account for every room within 20 minutes. Marsh had done it hundreds of times before. Chicago's downtown infrastructure told the story of the city's growth in cast iron and poured concrete. Some of that infrastructure ran deeper than the buildings it served. Beginning in 1899, private contractors had excavated a freight tunnel network running approximately 40 feet below the downtown streets, below the building foundations, below the gas and water lines, at a depth requiring pressurized work conditions to manage groundwater intrusion. By 1906, the network was operational, 60 miles of narrow-gauge electric railway connecting department stores, hotels, office buildings and rail terminals across the loop. The tunnels carried coal inbound, ash outbound, merchandise from the rail yards to receiving rooms in building sub-basements. They were maintained by a dedicated crew, mapped by the city engineer's office and taxed as commercial infrastructure. They appeared in the public record. They were not hidden. They were known, functional, and 40 feet down. Seattle offered a different precedent, one Marsh had encountered during a consulting engagement in 1919. In 1889, a fire destroyed 25 blocks of the commercial district. When the city rebuilt, street grades were raised, in some blocks by 10 feet, in others by 22, to resolve a drainage problem that had made the original streets functionally unusable at high tide. Buildings that had stood at street level found themselves below it once reconstruction was complete. Their first floors became basements. Their basements became sub-basements. In certain blocks, the original storefronts and passages remained intact beneath the new grade, accessible through sidewalk hatches used for storage, and then progressively sealed as the new city established itself overhead. A man born in one of those Seattle buildings in 1860 would have been 59 in 1919, old enough to carry a personal memory of when the passage beside him had been at street level and open to daylight. Marsh had entered some of those spaces. They were unremarkable, low-ceilinged, damp, stripped of function. What made them notable was their status on paper. They appeared on no current permit drawings. They existed below the official record of the city constructed above them. Each step, fire, reconstruction, grade change, ceiling, was plausible on its own. Together, they had produced spaces that no official map acknowledged. He thought about Seattle in September 1931, standing in front of the elevator panel in the sub-basement of the Carrington Building. The Carrington Building on West Jackson Boulevard was an 11-story commercial structure completed in 1911, with 2 documented sub-basement levels, B1 housing the mechanical plant and B2 providing freight access and cold storage. The freight elevator panel showed 3 stops, lobby, B1, B2, matching the permit drawings Marsh had reviewed in June. Between the B1 and B2 positions on the panel, set slightly apart from the standard floor selector switches, was a 4th position, a key-operated stop, the kind used for restricted access on penthouse service elevators or loading dock controls. Key stops were not uncommon. What was uncommon was the absence of any corresponding floor on the permit drawings, on the construction records, or on the 1911 elevator maintenance manual, updated in 1924. He noted it in his field log in the language his training prescribed, flat, factual, stripped of interpretation. Key-operated stop, freight elevator between B1 and B2, not reflected on permit drawings on file. Origin and function unknown. Building manager queried September 9th. No explanation offered. He filed a formal request the same afternoon for the original 1911 construction drawings, distinct from the copies held in the building maintenance office. The originals arrived 9 days later. They were not originals, they were copies. The transmittal letter noted that the original drawings had been transferred to the Chicago City Archive in 1919. The copies showed 2 sub-basement levels, nothing between them. Marsh took the freight elevator to the key stop on October 2nd, a Thursday morning, before the building's service crew arrived. He held master access to all mechanical systems in the Carrington Building, a standard condition of his employment contract. He rode down past B1, felt the car decelerate at the position indicated by the panel stop, and watched the indicator needle settle between the B1 and B2 marks. The elevator stopped, the door did not open, the door was sealed. A steel plate, approximately 18 inches wide and running the full height of the door frame, had been welded across the threshold from the elevator side. The weld was continuous, not spot welded, and the surface had been dressed with a coat of paint that had yellowed but not flaked. This was not a carpenter's board, it was not a sheet metal crew's improvisation. The plate had been installed with the care of a trades job intended to last, by someone who understood that permanence required more than obstruction. Marsh did not attempt to breach it. That was not his function and not his authority. What he could determine from examination he recorded as Observation 1. The plate was consistent with electric arc welding technique, post-dating the building's original 1911 construction, likely installed no earlier than the mid-1910s, based on welding method and paint chemistry he could assess visually. The floor indicator, a small mechanical needle mounted above the doorframe, rested at a position representing a level approximately 8 to 10 feet below B1. The ceiling of B1, which he had measured in June, sat 14 feet above its floor. A level 8 to 10 feet below B1 would place it within the structural zone of the B1 slab. Not impossible if the space had been excavated separately from the main sub-basement construction as a later addition or as a pre-existing condition incorporated into the building when it rose around it in 1911. The conduit told him more than the door, running along the left wall of the elevator shaft, exiting through a junction box at the level of the sealed stop. A single electrical conduit descended through the concrete, not horizontally into the B1 mechanical room, but down, following the shaft wall below the sealed plate. The conduit was 3/4-inch rigid steel, standard diameter for branch circuit wiring after the 1909 revision to the National Electric Code. That dating mattered. It meant the conduit had been run no earlier than 1909. The junction box showed a splice coupling of a type common after 1920. Someone had extended wiring into the sealed level after the door was welded shut. Observation 2. The remark from his colleague came 3 days later on October 5th at the end of a routine coordination meeting on Wabash Avenue. Thomas Garvey, a maintenance engineer whose portfolio included 3 buildings on Michigan Avenue and 2 on Wacker Drive, mentioned in passing, while discussing an unrelated elevator cable specification, that the Hulston Commercial Building on North Wacker had an old stop on the freight panel that nobody used. "Key stop," Garvey said, "below the lower basement. Been there since I took on the building in 27. Asked the owner once. He said it was from before his time." Marsh asked one question, whether the door at that stop was accessible. Garvey said he had never tried. Marsh noted the building name and address as observation 3. 2 buildings, 3 blocks apart, different owners, different original architects, one designed by a Graham Burnham successor firm, one by a smaller LaSalle Street practice, carrying the same configuration, a key-operated freight elevator stop below the documented sub-basement levels, present on no permit drawings, with no explanation in the maintenance history of either property. A colleague had worked in one of those buildings for 4 years without querying the stop. Nothing had demanded to be queried. It was simply there, below the bottom. He found the 1908 log on October 9th, tucked behind a condensate return pipe in the B1 mechanical room of the Carrington Building, in the narrow service corridor running behind the boiler bank, a space Marsh had entered dozens of times without surveying the back of the pipe housing. The log covered March 1907 through November 1908, referenced the Carrington Building by address on the cover label, and described 3 levels of sub-basement activity, not 2. The 3rd level appeared throughout under the notation Lower Service Corridor. Entries referenced monthly inspection of drainage sumps, lubrication of a freight transfer mechanism, and recurring maintenance on ventilation dampers controlling airflow to that level. The work was routine. The language was the language of men doing ordinary work in ordinary spaces, which meant that in 1908 the lower service corridor had been ordinary. A 70-year-old reading that log in 1938 would have been approximately 20 in 1908, possibly one of the workers who made those entries, who climbed down to that level on a Monday morning and wrote the date and the job and went home. That level had been normal once. Someone decided it should not appear in the record after that. He lit a match in the elevator shaft at the level of the sealed door and held it near the base of the wall plate. The flame moved, a steady directional deflection consistent with passive airflow through a gap too small to see. The lower service corridor was still receiving ventilation from the building's mechanical system, drawn through whatever clearances remained around the sealed threshold. The space below was not deteriorating in the dark. It was breathing. Observation 4. Marsh visited the Chicago City Permit Office on October 14th. He requested the construction permit file for the Carrington Building, specifically the original 1911 drawings listed as transferred from the Building Management Office in 1919. The clerk searched the index. The file was present. The drawings on file matched the copies Marsh had already reviewed. 2 sub-basement levels, no intermediate stop, no lower service corridor. He asked whether decommissioning permits existed for any sub-level modifications at the property after 1911. The clerk searched again. No decommissioning permit existed. He asked a second question, whether the original drawings transferred in 1919 were on file. The clerk located a transfer notation in the 1919 intake log, but could not produce the drawings. They had been refiled per the notation with the building's general permit history. The general permit history yielded the same copies he had already seen. Marsh recorded Observation 5. No decommissioning record for sub-level modifications, Carrington Building. Original 1911 drawings transferred to City Archive per 1919 notation. Current file contains copies only. City Archive cannot produce originals. He added the Halston Commercial Building to his inquiry that same afternoon, presenting the North Wacker address to the same clerk. The Halston file showed 2 sub-basement levels on its permit drawings, no key stop, no lower level, no decommissioning permit for any sub-level modification at any point in the building's recorded history. He contacted James Pryor, a third colleague whose portfolio included 2 Michigan Avenue properties built between 1905 and 1910. Pryor confirmed, when asked directly, that one of his buildings carried a sealed freight stop he had assumed was a legacy configuration from a previous tenant. He had never queried it. 3 buildings, 3 different original architects, 3 different ownership histories, the same configuration. A key-operated stop, a sealed door, a sub-level present in no permit drawing and generating no decommissioning record. Buildings accumulate paper the way they accumulate infrastructure, permits, inspections, variance records, certificate of occupancy renewals, each layer referencing the last. A decommissioned space generates a permit. A sealed level, officially closed, produces a notation and a corresponding entry in the city index. What Marsh found at the permit office was the absence of that paper, not misfiled, not damaged, simply never generated. The lower service corridor had not been decommissioned. It had been closed without documentation, which meant the closure had been made by someone who did not want it recorded. He wrote Observation 7 on October 19th. It was the only observation in his report that stepped outside the strict conventions of engineering documentation, not in tone but in scope. He wrote, "Abandonment produces deterioration. Abandoned mechanical systems corrode, settle, accumulate moisture damage, and show measurable decay over periods of 5 to 15 years. What I am observing is preservation without use. The ventilation remains functional. The electrical conduit has been extended. The 1908 maintenance log describes routine service activity in a space then considered ordinary. The sealed door plate implies the closure was deliberate and permanent. These facts do not resolve. A space cannot be simultaneously ordinary and invisible. One condition was chosen over the other, and the choice was made on paper, not in the building." He submitted the completed report on October 28, 1931, 11 pages, a cover letter addressed to the Continental Building Management Association, and a parallel submission to the Chicago City Engineering Office. Both acknowledged receipt in writing. The association's response, dated October 30th, noted the findings would be reviewed. The City Engineering Office confirmed receipt on November 4th and assigned a file reference number. No inspection was initiated at any of the 3 buildings. No follow-up correspondence reached Marsh. On November 3rd, he received a reassignment notice, a suburban contract in Evanston, 3 residential properties and a small commercial block. Workload redistribution across the portfolio, the notice said. He amended the final line of his report before filing his copy. Reassignment effective November 3rd, 1931. The City Engineering Office file, accessible through the Chicago Municipal Archive Index, contains no report by Walter Marsh filed in October or November 1931 under any reference number corresponding to the Carrington Building. The original is not misfiled. It is simply not there. Each step, submission, acknowledgement, assignment of a file number, disappearance, is plausible on its own. Together they form something harder to set aside. In April 1992, a pile-driving crew working on a utility project beneath the Loop accidentally breached a wall of the freight tunnel network. Water flooded approximately 250 miles of interconnected basement and sub-basement space across the downtown district within hours. When city engineers surveyed the damage, they found sections of the network that did not appear on any maintained tunnel map. Whole corridors, branch lines, modified junctions, some showing evidence of use and modification, after the system's official decommissioning in the 1950s. The full extent of the unrecorded sections was never publicly quantified. The city's understanding of its own underground, as of April 1992, was less complete than anyone had assumed. 60 years earlier, a maintenance engineer had noted in a numbered observation that a space could not be simultaneously ordinary and invisible. The 1992 flood confirmed, in the plainest possible terms, that the city had made a similar error. The buildings above those tunnels are still standing. Several have been renovated in the decades since, their mechanical systems updated, their sub-basements converted to storage or utility space. The renovation permits on file at the Chicago City Archive reference the documented levels. None references a lower service corridor. The carbon copy is still there.